Hey guys, thanks for joining on my first ever YouTube tutorial. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. If you don't, please comment and let me know if there's a better way to do this. There's really not a lot of documentation on the Lyra system, or Metasounds for that matter. So trying to use both in tandem while making this menu was a pretty good challenge, so I wanted to share how I did it. So when I press the right stick on my controller, it'll play a new song. And if I go into a game, it's probably going to crash the first time I run it. Nope, we're good. So when I quit that, it will start playing the music again. That right stick button is dynamic based on what key you want to assign to it. So where I'm wiggling my mouse now, as I move my controller, it gives it that right stick. So let's get into it. So what are we doing first? So let's walk through it. So this is the thing that's going to be pretty unpopular. I needed a way for these widgets to share variables. So in order to do that, I had to access the Lyra game instance. And I have no code running, so it shouldn't be too expensive, but I did have to stick 3 effectively global variables. I'm sure there's a better way to do it. I think it would take a long time for me to figure it out without any guidance. If you do know a better way, please let me know. So without further ado, let's get into there. So we first assign a couple of variables on the front end. So we have our front end, our track array, which is a struct. So we store a bunch of data in there, and then we have the track array index. So that's the number that we're gonna play, like in the array of songs, which number song will play. And then we have our music references, which are all sound waves. They won't be audio, so we're not doing a create sound 2D because that doesn't work with Metasounds. So once we get those variables, and we'll assign the music system variable, just like how we do in the music manager component. So that's what would initially control Metasounds. So how you would get to that, if you just search for all b underscore music manager, there's going to be a front end component, there's going to be a base. I made a duplicate of the base, I just called it OG, but I'm working off base. And we can see that that creates a 2D sound, which is the object reference of the music system. So I duplicated this and just put underscore levity afterward because that's the title of the project that I'm working on. And we'll get back into that code in a minute. All right, so it checks and makes sure that this array is empty. So it's only going to be empty when we first initialize the game, when we first start the game. After that, that array is going to be stored in the game instance. So it's going to be stored basically across the game from there, which will be useful if you want maybe music playing in other modes seamlessly from your main menu. So once it's empty, we'll initialize music. So I have everything organized into functions. So the first one, initialize music. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set a variable called track list, which is a data table, as our data table track list. And the way I got into this was under my music player scene component folder. So let me X out of this search. If I go to UI, and just wanted to mention, music player scene component was actually what I initially started working on. So it's on Marketplace. It's really, really useful. I think it's like $7. It works perfectly. The problem is it doesn't work with Lyra because this works off of a player controller, which is fine unless, and I won't be able to show what happens since I fixed the problem, but what would happen is if I added a second player, it would add a second player controller, and then there'd be 2 songs playing at the exact same time, and I really couldn't find an effective way around that. So I pretty much had to rebuild this from the ground up, but I did save some components there, including some of the front end widget music player graphics, just for now as a placeholder. So after we set that track list, and let me actually jump into that track list. So it's just a data table. Actually, I think it's under blueprints. Yeah, so it's a data table. It has no parent. It's just a straight up data table. And so it's going to have 5 different columns, 5 different attributes for each row. So you're going to have the artist, the title name, the album, and if you want to include album art, and of course the audio file, which you can grab from any folder that you want to store in. I just stored mine under menu music, all right there. So I'm just going to X out of that because once you populate this with what you want to have in it, you don't really need to look at it anymore. So once we've set that track list, we then fill the music array. So how do we do that? So we look at the track list that we just defined in that variable from a step back, and this was all used from the music player component. So I'll link that in the description if you guys want to support that that programmer. That was really helpful for me to get where I got. So we get the data table row names, and we're gonna cast to the game instance again. So how you get to that game instance file, if you just go Lyra game instance, you should see two files. So your C++ class and then the blueprint, who is a child of that C++ class. There's no events running in here. I'm zooming all the way out. There's nothing there. That's where we put those three variables. And if you want to see what folder that's in, you can always right click, show in folder view, and there it is there. So it's actually, it's just right in our content folder. So again, there's probably a better way to do it than storing variables there, but that's the way that I made it work. So going back to this fill music array function within the initialize function. So we cast to Lyra game instance again, and then for each loop within the row of that track list, we're going to get the data and we're going to add it to that front end track array struct variable that we set in Lyra game instance, and we're just going to add it to it. Once we're done adding to it, once we've completed the loop, I shuffle them up, and that way every time you start the game there's a new order playlist so that it shuffles. You don't have to add this step. If you want it to play in the same order, or if you wanted to play a particular song, then you would just call a particular index in a later step, but that's how I wanted to set it up for mine. So going back to initialize, so we filled the music array. Now we're going to fill the music references. So we cast to the game instance to get that struct again, that struct object, and we break the struct and we grab the audio file and then we add it into the front end music refs. So we filled the music array, we filled the music refs. We're going to cast to Lyra one more time, and we're going to get the music ref, and we're going to get the array index number that it is, and we're going to assign that wave in B menu music. So what's B menu music? That is a wave parameter that we set into Metasounds. So via Lyra game instance's music system, which we set in the prior to going into initialize music here, is a input variable on our Metasound system. So this is the original Metasound system. If you want to know how to get to, you can always just go to all mx_system, and there it is. So I made a duplicate, I named it Levity, and that's where I did all my work off of. So this was the original. Everything in here is going to be the same, except when I go, let me just jump back to system again. So this is the main menu. It's going to play those like triggered sounds in the original Lyra example, and then output them back out to the main left and right, which all the way on the output mixing, that's where it comes out over there. Okay, so jumping back to my file, I just cut off all that extra bit. We're still going to output to the main menu at the end. So once we get to the main menu, we're going to trigger once. If we don't put this in, then every time it triggers, it will constantly try to start a song over and over and over, and then we don't want that. We only want it to be reset when we call a new song, or a song has ended, or if we've come back to the main menu from somewhere that isn't the main menu. So we play the main menu. Sorry, let me just jump back here one more second. So we've initialized, just jumping back. Set wave parameter, that's the money right there. So when we set wave parameter, that sets B menu music here. So that's just a variable that I've set as an input. You also have outputs and then standard variables. This is what I set as an input into here. So we've set that variable, and then as long as the music system's playing, which it is at this point, if it's not, then it's not going to set this music widget info and play the widget animation. It's kind of you almost don't need the branch, but I don't know. I have it there. I could probably get rid of it. So when we set the music widget info, we're setting what the front end is going to display. So we set the music widget info, we cast to the game instance, we break the struct again, and we get the artist, the title, the album, and the album cover. That's all taken from that data table file, excuse me. And then going back to initialize. Oh, one more thing to mention. So we're setting the text everywhere. We're setting it to artist, title, album, album cover. So what are those? Artist, title, album, and album cover. Those are set as widget variables in our front end. So this was another part that was taken from the music player scene component. So a lot of this was already pre-built for me. I added the skip song button, which I'll get into in just a second. So we have the background, and then we have these extra boxes underneath. So artist, title, album. If we wanted to display elapsed time, we can, but I just set the alpha to 0 because I didn't want to show it in mine. And then our skip song button. So this is one little extra step here too. So while these are just standard text blocks that are typed in, this skip song button is a Lyra button widget. Okay? So how you would make that from here is you'd have to create a new widget. So how would I do that? I would right click. We'd type widget. We'd get a widget blueprint, and we would make the parent W Lyra button. And you would click that, and then you have a widget button whose parent is the button. And the reason why that's important is two reasons. The first is it allows you to bring in this triggering input action. So what's triggering input action? That's going to be, you can assign keys and buttons, like gamepad buttons, to actions. So I'm just clicking this folder here to browse to where that folder is. So I have that set in the front end UI. And if we double click this, we see it has just one entry. I called it skip song, and I assigned a key input to be \, and I assigned the game input to be the right thumbstick button. So once I create that file, it's going to be accessible on skip song, or really on any Lyra button for that matter. In fact, if we went here and we went to W Lyra button, you could make all your W Lyra buttons have that input, although I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. So under triggering input action, you want to leave those none for your parent class, but just wanted to show like where that goes. So we bring in this data table front end actions here. You can type and search for it once you make yours if it has a different name. Mine only has one option on the row name because it only has one row. And then this white box will become whatever button you assign to it because you're using a Lyra button. And the cool thing is, the way I run this animation, this widget is active the whole time. It's just off screen, so that button's always going to be pressable even though you can't see it. It's basically a button that's hidden off screen that has a hotkey assigned to it, is one way to think of it. Okay, so going back to the graph of the front end, we have set the music widget, and that's the end of our initialize. So now we're going back to the event graph. So we've casted, we saw that the array was initially empty, we initialized, and when we initialize, simultaneously, because we're in the main menu, sorry, give me one sec. So going back to the MX system, and it's going to be the same for both. I didn't change this part, but the game's going to see when we actually are in the menu. So that's another input trigger. Sorry, it's an input boolean technically, but when that boolean is true, it's going to activate the main menu. It's going to play main menu. So we can right click over here, we can jump to the node in the graph, and that's going to highlight it here for us. So I'm just zooming back in, and then this is the logic for playing the songs. So I'll walk through that now. So once we've activated play main menu, and just to show how that works, if you highlight the input that you want to practice changing, you can hit the play button here. It's playing music in my file. If I uncheck this, it's going to start playing here as if we're in the game and not in the main menu. And if I check this again, it'll start playing the music again. Only thing I changed over here was I changed the BPM. I can't remember what it is out of the box. It might be 100 or it might even be 60. So I made that 200 just to refresh a little bit more often since it's looking for input there. And I'll share what that looks like here in a second. I just want to walk through this first. So we've activated main menu. We trigger once. I add a trigger repeat. So it's only going to repeat based on the playback time of the file that we're playing. So based on the input, we get the wave duration and we assign that to playback time. Make sure you make this a delayed variable. So the way to do that is on your left side of your screen here, you'd click and drag, and you would hold Alt to get a delayed variable. If you don't do a delayed variable, I'll show you what happens there. It's going to tell you it's a loop, and it's not going to let you link them together, if I recall correctly. Well, it did that time. I was spending hours trying to figure out why it wouldn't before, but you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I'm going to make it a delayed file again because I don't want to break anything. So just going to save all that. And so the music's been assigned. We run the trigger repeat to the wave player. When the track ends, it's going to call onTrackFinish. So onTrackFinish is an output. Going back to the front end, zooming out, we have an event tick. I don't like event ticks, but this is the front end menu, so there's really not a lot computationally happening. This is another important piece here, the Metasound output system. That's what's going to be able allow you to be able to see output variables from your Metasound file. It's tough to pass variables inside of here because often you can only set it once. You can only receive it once in other scenarios. So we call that Metasound output system. We call our music system variable. We put those both into watch output. We can't create just a regular custom variable or custom event over here, so I'm just going to create custom event. If I try to connect these two, it's going to say delegate is not compatible with delegate. So what you want to do is actually drag from this red square and do custom event that way, and that's what's going to let you actually bind that variable, bind that event to watch output. So when the song ends, so just jumping back to the Metasounds, that's be on track finish. And look what's written here, be on track finish. So we're watching for the output for when that output gets triggered. And when that happens, we'll call new song, and then we'll get new widget. We'll get the widget info and the widget animation. So we don't call new song here at the top because we're going into the menu for the first time. And the first time we go into the menu triggers this. Once you've gone into the main menu once, you need to find a way to reset that. And so hitting new track is going to be one way that we do that. And that's what happens inside of new song. So that's, I think, the final function. Yep, that'll be the final function. One thing I wanted to share too that I skipped past. So I cast a Lyra game instance here. This is actually a saved function that I made for myself. So I'm actually casting inside of this function just to save myself space. It just felt a little cleaner to me. You don't have to do that. It's just an extra step. So inside of new song, nothing terribly complicated here. We're going to cast to the Lyra game instance one final time and get the length of the array. And the reason we get the length of the array is because every time we hit new song, we're going to increment the index value of the array by 1. However, we don't want that index value to go over the maximum of the length. So I'm just going to, if you want to pause the screen here, you can take a look at this code. Just talking through it, you get the array length, you subtract it by 1 since arrays start at 0 and not 1. And if the array index number is less than that, then we'll increment. And if it's not less than that, then we will just set the array index back to 0, aka start the tracks over again. So from there, we'll set the wave parameter to be menu music, which, just as a reminder, is what we set to here. Then we execute a trigger parameter called be new track. So these are both bound to the music system. And that's where new track gets called. So when that happens, it routes the shared trigger into this reset trigger once, which allows a new song to pass through here and start playing the new song. The other bit I have linked through here, this currently does nothing. This is sort of a relic of something I was working on that didn't quite make a difference, but maybe it's something I'll look into in the future. So music faded, if we go back down here, when the menu is false, we're no longer playing menu, and we're actually fading from main menu into the game music, and that activates music faded. So then there's a delayed music faded, and when that happens, it stops the music. Additionally, when that happens, it's going to trigger this, which is going to reset this trigger, and that's going to allow the song to begin playing again when we return to the main menu from playing a different game experience. I think that might be it. One last thing. So going into the front end, going to the skip song button, we need to create a, I'm blanking on the word. It starts with a D. Dispatcher. It can't be a button. It needs to be dispatcher. Correct me on that if I'm getting that terminology wrong, guys. But basically, what I'm trying to say is you can't go into the graph and do add custom event on button base clicked. There's nothing that it's not going to see the button input. So what you need to do is go in here and already have this one assigned. So it's just going to jump to it when I click it. Yours will create a blank function. But if I click this, it will jump to on button base clicked. And on button base clicked, we want to go to the next song. So we call next song, which calls this function or this event, which then calls the new song function, gets the new music info and plays the animation again. Play music info widget animation is one other thing. So that's just this bit here. There's probably a better way to do this because mine's definitely visually buggy. If I try to like spam skip song over and over and over, like sometimes it doesn't show up. So I know that delay's messing that up. There's definitely a better way to do that. Delays are bad. Don't use delays. So we play the animation forward, which is called slide fade, and I'll show that here in a second. We play it, we wait 4 seconds, and then we play it in reverse. So what is slide fade? So sorry, didn't mean to click down there. If I go to designer, and then down here on the bottom left, animations, we have an animation called slide fade. And so we start with the render opacity at 0, aka invisible, and the translation at 615, so it's 615 pixels off to the right. And after a second, we move that translation to 0 and the opacity to 1. And as you can see in the animation playing, it loses its or gains opacity and slides over to the left to see that music in action. So I just click out of the animation to close the animation. And I think that might really actually be it. Yeah, that's it. All right, guys. Again, if that was helpful, please like, subscribe. If you have any questions, please reach out in the comments, and happy coding.